maybe probably on the, could be there, but it could, do we have a whole Mediterranean map? Oh, this is it. Oh, we don't have cards. Okay, everybody go to page 77. Let's put it on the Italy map. Because that is an oversight. We're also going to add something to our timelines this week. So open your reading guide to page 77. There should be a map of Italy. And then remember how this works. Italy kicks Sicily. And if you follow it across, Africa juts up right there. And Carthage is right there on that jutting up place. Carthage, C-A-R-T-H-A-G-E. No, that should have been there. And you know what? While we're in the back of your book, let's just do the timeline. Let's just do the timeline at the same time. This one, 72. Last week we put the first Punic War on. I guess, when we do this, I'm going to ruin the end of the story, but you already read the book, so you already know the end of the story. We have a timeline that says 500 BC to 1 BC. And we know that the middle would be 250. And somewhere around the middle, you have the First Punic War. Right below that, so coming forward in time, we're going to put 218 to 201, the Second Punic War. These are long wars. The last one was over 20 years. This is 17 years. Can you imagine an enemy invading your home country and rampaging up and down for 17 years? Wasn't quite 17 years, but a good 15 years of that. And then while we're there, we're going to add one more thing. Just below, again, it doesn't matter which side you do it, 146. 146 is such an important year because Carthage, I'm putting this sideways. You don't have to write it like this. I'm just writing it for room. Carthage destroyed. And something else happened the same year, but I'm not going to tell you yet, which is why it's such an important year. All right, if you've got that done, you can go back to where our reading questions are. Oh, and we don't have a, no, okay, just a second. We don't have a wipey thing. Yes, well, I mean, I meant in this case, anything that can wipe it. The eraser, yes, there was no hope for an eraserette. Any wipeable, wiping thing. I meant to get that out earlier. Okay. So, who was the great Carthaginian general of the Second Punic War? Who's the guy you read almost the whole time about? Hannibal. Hannibal. Why? This was the second half of that question. Why is he so set on attacking Rome? Why does this guy want to attack Rome? Because he's bored? He has a reason. Oh, we have to read the reason. Okay, hang on. Do you remember last week? Carthage had a general named Hamilcar. Hamilcar Barca, the thunderer, right? And he had a son. My father Hamilcar, says Hannibal, when I was a very little boy, only 9 years old, when he was going to take command in Spain, to Jupiter Optimus Maximus, offered sacrifices. And while these rites were going on, he asked me whether I would like to go with him to the camp. As I expressed, what 9-year-old boy doesn't want to go to the army camp with dad? As I expressed extreme willingness to go, he begged him not to delay taking me. He replied, I will do so, if you will give me the promise which I ask. Thereupon he led me to the altar at which he had begun to sacrifice. He's going to swear on the altar of Jupiter. And sending the rest of the company away required me, taking hold of the altar, to swear that I would never hold friendship with Romans. Son, I want you to swear on the altar of the gods, you will always be hostile to the Romans. You will always hate the Romans. And he did it. He did it. So after the First War, Carthage still controlled a lot of Spain. Remember, they were sort of the masters of the whole Western Mediterranean, and they had little outposts all over. In fact, one of them, Carthago Noah, New Carthage, is the name of the settlement. So Hamilcar took Hannibal to Spain, and Spain is where they are swearing this oath. But the Romans also had some outposts in Spain. They had one called Saguntum. And so time passes and Hamilcar dies. And Hannibal's still pretty young, so Hamilcar's brother takes over for a while, and then his brother dies. And then Hannibal gets control. He's in his 20s, his early 20s, kind of like Alexander the Great, you know. And so he says, you know what? Hate the Romans. Promised my dad, promised Jupiter, hate the Romans. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to go attack their town of Saguntum. Just because. And so he does. And they send messages, the Saguntines send messages to Rome and said, help, a little help. Do you know what the Carthaginians are doing? We're a colony, we're a tributary of yours, you owe us help. So the Senate sends people to Carthage and says, hey, what you attacking Saguntum for? Do you know Hannibal's attacking? And they said, I don't know. What do you want me to do about it? And they said, we want you to stop. And they said, well, you know, I don't know. Hannibal's young. He's kind of headstrong. He does things. Make him stop. Well, we don't really care whether or not he stops. They said, whatever, you know, we'll do what we want. And so the Roman senator shakes out his toga. It's kind of like in the Bible, you shake the dust off your feet of the town, you know, that won't welcome you. Shakes off his toga and says, we leave you peace or war, whichever you will. And then we'll take the war. Do it, Hannibal. So he takes Saguntum, they flee, and he has this crazy idea. What amazing military feat did he accomplish? This is the next question. He did, with elephants. Hannibal's going to get you. But okay, he went to Rome with elephants. Good for you, Hannibal. But he's in Spain. There are mountains that divide Spain from Gaul. What is now France? The Pyrenees. They're not enormous, you know, they're not Mount Everest, but they're no slouch. You've got to get across these. Now you've got to travel across southern Gaul. The people here don't like you. They wish you would go away. He says to them, well, we won't take anything. We just pass it through because we hate the Romans. We don't hate you. You know, you should probably hate the Romans too because they may come attack you someday, which is going to happen. He says, no, we don't care. We don't like you. And so he has to deal with attack the whole time. Go ahead, say it. Well, he did. Some of them. But you see, the bad thing is there's more where they came from, you see. And if you get rid of a few of them, more will come. It's easier to just make them friendly to you, but they were not friendly. A few of them were, not much. And then the Rhone River is in your way. It's a big river. It's too deep. You can't wade across it. Apparently, your elephants can't even swim across. Don't know if elephants swim. Been thinking about this week. Don't know about elephants in water. But apparently, that was not an option here. Because what they did is they built rafts, huge rafts, and they covered them with dirt and grass and stuff, so it just looked like ground. And they said, come on, elephants, go, step onto the ground. And they did, and then they cast the rafts loose, and they floated the elephants across. The elephants didn't like it, apparently. I know, but they did it. I know, I don't think I know the dimensions. I don't think anyone says the dimensions. Okay, so, but then you made it. You made it, yay, except at the Alps. The Alps surround Italy. They cut Italy off from, at this point, I'm thinking maybe you should have just floated the elephants by sea. But, but you've got to cross the Alps with elephants. And the people there don't like you either. And so they take the high ground, and we've discussed this many times. If someone's above you, they fling things down on you.
They throw rocks. They take your head and they throw
Well,
rocks.
Huge rocks, some of them. So at one point, Hannibal's down on a ledge below, and the mountain tribes are up above. Okay, and they spend all day flinging things. But then Hannibal's group heard from a deserter or a spy. They go home at night. The guys up here go home at night, and then they come back in the morning. So Hannibal said, "Got it." So that evening, he had them light tons of campfires, more than you would need for the number of people he had. We're not going anywhere. Look at all our campfires. Look how we're all still here. And he takes a group of guys and he goes up and he takes the high place. So they show up in the morning, like, they took our place. And so the rest of the army starts winding up the hill, but the mountain tribes find another place and they fling stuff on them. Their horses are falling off the sides of the cliff. They did lose some elephants, over the side. So he finally gets to the other side, and I believe Dorothy Mills gave you part of he gives him a pep talk. Down below you, you see Italy, and we are going to be masters of Rome in a month, and the worst is past. The worst was not past. So this is actually, there's a Roman historian named Livy, and he lived about the time of Christ. And he wrote 45 books, which is like chapters in this. This is 10 of them, all right, to give you an idea of Roman history from the beginning. But we only have 12 or 15 of the books left. The rest are all lost. But we have all his books about Hannibal and the Second Punic War. Thank goodness. And this is all about the war with Hannibal. This is all the Second Punic War. But so here's what happened. They got to the other side of the Alps, the Italy side. It says, soon they found themselves on the edge of a precipice, a narrow cliff falling away so sheer that even a lightly armed soldier could hardly have got down it by feeling his way and clinging to such bushes and stumps as presented themselves. It must always have been a most awkward spot, but a recent landslide had converted it on this occasion to a perpendicular drop of nearly 1,000 feet. On the brink, the cavalry drew rein. Their journey seemed to be over. Hannibal in the rear did not yet know what had brought the column to a halt, but when the message was passed to him that there was no possibility of proceeding, he went in person to reconnoiter. It was clear to him that a detour would have to be made, however long it might prove to be, over a trackless and untrodden slopes in the vicinity. But even so, he was no luckier. Progress was impossible, for though there was good foothold in the quite shallow layer of soft, fresh snow, which had covered the old snow underneath, nevertheless, as soon as it had been trampled and dispersed by the feet of all those men and animals, there was left to tread upon only the bare ice and liquid slush of melting snow underneath. You guys all know what this is like. You get up and it's a nice winter morning. Oh, isn't the snow pretty? And then about 40 people walk through something, or your dog runs back and forth. And what is it? It's a slush mud mess, right? And the stuff that's melted a little bit refreezes and it's all ice. This is what they got. The result was a horrible struggle, the ice affording no foothold in any case, and least of all on a steep slope. When a man tried by hands or knees to get on his feet again, even those useless supports slipped from under him and let him down. There were no stumps or roots anywhere to afford a purchase to either foot or hand. In short, there was nothing for it but to roll and slither on the ground, on the smooth ice and melting snow. Sometimes the mule's weight would drive their hoofs through into the layer of old snow. This has happened to you too, right? You know the crust, the snow crust, and then it breaks and your foot goes through and all the stuff underneath, but it's the mules, the pack animals that's happening. And then you can't, you're just stuck. They would fall, and once down, lashing savagely out in their struggles to rise, would break right through it, so that as often as not, they were held as in a vice by a thick layer of hard ice. All right, this is what they face. Dorothy Mills tells us that Livy mentions that the Italy side of the Alps is shorter, so steeper. The whole side is steeper. So the climb on the other side was bad enough, but you know, the shorter the hill, the steeper it is to the bottom. This is what they dealt with. They are. It was disheartening. It was disheartening. But so Hannibal gets them through the worst. They get down to an elevation where it starts, things are growing again. You know, there's no snow and things are growing. He says, okay, look, the worst is over. Look what you just did, the ones of you who are still alive. Look what you just did. This is going to be a cakewalk. It's not a cakewalk. But it was at the beginning because the Romans, of course, the Romans knew this, he was on the way. They pulled their generals back from Spain, the two Scipios, two brothers, come help us. And they hurried back to Italy. But the consuls that year, one of them was named Flaminius. And, sorry, I have too many things to look at today. Flaminius, Dorothy Mills just, not Flaminius. Hang on. Flaminius was a fiery, impatient leader, apt to be overbearing, self-willed, and headstrong. No match for the cool and cautious Hannibal, but he was determined at all costs to drive out the invader. Hannibal knew this, and fully understanding the character of Flaminius, directed his next move against him. Okay, you're Hannibal. You've just made it through those mountains. You've floated elephants across rivers. You're feeling really good about yourself. You're good. You managed something good. And you know the general on the other side, the Roman general, is just hot for a fight. He just wants to prove himself, right? Can you picture it? Now, you could wait and take your time. The other guy wants to fight. Maybe he wants to fight so very badly, he'll be a little reckless. Can you picture it? This is exactly what happened. Hannibal sucked him into a trap. Sucked him into going into a valley along the lake with no outlet. I mean, to the sides because of the hills. And attacked him there. Okay, this is what Livy says. Flaminius had reached the lake at sunset the previous day. On the day following, in the uncertain light of early dawn, he entered the narrow pass. No sort of reconnaissance had been made. He didn't send anybody to check it out. Are there Carthaginians there? I don't know. When his column began to open out on reaching the wider area of level ground north of the lake, he was aware only of those enemy units which were in the direct line of his advance. Oh, I see Carthaginians ahead of me. I can whoop them. Of the units concealed in his rear and in the hills above him, he had no inkling whatever. Hannibal had achieved his object. As soon as he had his antagonist pinned in by the lake and the mountains and surrounded, front, rear, and flank, by his own men, he gave the order for a simultaneous attack by all units. Down they came from the hills, each man by the nearest way, taking the Romans totally unprepared. The unexpectedness of the attack, moreover, was increased by the morning mist from the lake, lying thicker on the low ground than on the hills. The units on the hills could see each other well enough and were able, in consequence, to better coordinate their attack. You've all probably seen this too, like a coolish summer morning and the mist is just resting on the ground. You get above it and you can see fine, but it's so thick down by the ground, you're fogged in. All of Flaminius's guys are fogged in, but the Carthaginians on the hills, they can see everything that's going on because they're up out of the mist. By the battle cry which arose on every side of them, the Romans knew they were surrounded before they could see that the trap had closed. Fighting began in front and on their flanks before the column had time to form into a line of battle. In the general shock and confusion, Flaminius, so far as the emergency permitted, kept a cool head, tried as well as time and place allowed to reduce the chaos. Wherever he could make his voice heard or force a way through the press, he encouraged his men. Okay, I'm going to skip down a little bit, though. In the chaos that reigned, not a soldier could recognize his own standard or knew his place in the ranks. Indeed, they were almost too bemused to get proper control over their swords and shields, while to some their very armor and weapons proved not a defense but a fatal encumbrance. In the enveloping mist, ears were a better guide than eyes. It was sounds, not sights, they turned to face, the groans of wounded men, the thud or ring of blows on body or shield, the shout of onslaught, the cry of fear. Some, flying for their lives, found themselves caught in a jam of their own men, still standing their ground. Others, trying to return to the fight, were forced back again by a crowd of fugitives. Such was the famous fight at Lake Trasimene, one of the few memorable disasters to Roman arms. The Roman dead amounted to 15,000. 10,000 scattered in flight throughout Etruria found their way back to Rome. Of the enemy, 2,500 were killed. Body count, 15,000 to 2,500. It was a disaster. So they went back to Rome and they had to tell everybody, they had to tell the families, tell people who weren't used to losing. You know, we own Italy. We run Sicily. Why? Because we don't lose in general. We lost big. So after this disaster, a new consul was elected, and Quintus Fabius Maximus. And he earned the nickname Cunctator. I will ask you what his policy is, and then I'll tell you what Cunctator means. What did Quintus Fabius Maximus think they should do about Hannibal? What's the strategy? He likes his name. It's very regal sounding.
It sounds like he had like his mom, like he just had like
Well, a lot of us have three. I mean, do you have a middle name? So if you, some people go by it. I know it's a very lofty sounding name indeed. This is true. Yes. Maximus means the greatest, if that makes you. It's kind of a braggy name. What does he want to do about Hannibal? What's his plan? Does anybody remember? Here's Fabius's plan. We will refer to him as Fabius. Hannibal's a really good fighter. And now he's feeling really good about himself because he just killed 15,000 Roman soldiers, sucked the consul into a trap, killed him, after having brought all his people through hundreds of miles of obstacles. So don't fight him. This is Fabius's plan. Don't fight him. He is going to run out of food and resources eventually. There's only so long you can rampage up and down Italy and burn things. Hannibal, when he showed up, this was what was in his head. The Italians hate Rome. All the Latin people hate Rome because Rome conquered them. And so they will go over to my side and they will fight with me. He did it. It's kind of like the Sabine women that they kidnapped, you know, and then they ran out later and said, "Oh, we love them now. They're our new husbands." That's what the Latin people said. "Oh, don't hurt Rome. It's our friend now. She's our friend." And very few of them went over to Hannibal, which means how's he going to get food? You can only bring so much food with you, right? And then if the Romans are smart enough to destroy some of the food in their path, they can't eat. We talked about this before. Italy, once upon a time, had a lot of wet, marshy areas where mosquitoes live. Mosquitoes bite you and give you malaria. So he's going to get sick. He's going to get hungry. He will leave. This was Fabian tactics. They still talk about Fabian tactics. Not so much anymore because people don't know the old stories. But back when an education meant what we're doing right now, you knew these stories. That's what it was. Everybody knew when you said Fabian tactics. Delay. Cunctator means delayer. Just wait. till it blows over. So sometimes they will talk about Fabian tactics in the Senate or the House of Representatives. It means they're not acting on something, they're just delaying. They're waiting till it blows over, and maybe they'll get their way. This is Fabius's idea. And Hannibal, Livy tells us, Hannibal knew he was really smart. Like, oh man, Flaminius was an idiot. Fabius understands me. So Fabius would just take his army and he would just follow Hannibal around. Like, I'm just keeping an eye on you. I know where you are, but I'm not going to fight. You just, good luck finding some food. But how long do you get to be consul? Yeah. And so they vote in new consuls, and you can't be consul again till 10 years have passed. So Fabius's great plan only lasts for a year. And unfortunately, well, but the consuls are the generals. You have to have it voted you. So now he becomes a senator. And they can, if enough people like his tactics, they can vote him in, which does happen again. But it doesn't happen right away. And here's part of the reason, Rhett. The popular impression was that he's a coward. I think Fabius doesn't fight because he's afraid Hannibal will beat him. That's what people thought. And so Fabius was fighting two different groups. Like he was not fighting Hannibal physically, but he was out in the field and he was watching Hannibal, but he's also fighting at home, trying to convince people, no, I'm telling you, this is all strategy. It's stupid to attack him and play right into his hands. Let him wear himself out. No more young Roman men have to die. And it'll be over. Okay. He was ready to fight if he had to, but mostly he was just watching him. So, but he's out of office. Two guys come in, Aemilius Paulus and Varro. Aemilius Paulus is older, maybe a little wiser. Varro is young. He's like Flaminius. I'm going to make a name for myself. I'm going to be the guy who takes down Hannibal. All right. Yes.
I think it should make sense that he was like that because everybody was like, I'm not like him.
Sure. Absolutely. No, I understand it completely. It just was a bad idea. And of course, I'm going to tell you what happened to him. And so in hindsight, we know it was a bad idea. So Fabius took the older one, Aemilius Paulus, aside before they left. And he said, look, you know why I did what I did. You know it's a good plan. You need to do all you can to avoid open battle with Hannibal and keep young Varro in check if you possibly can. Keep him under control. And Aemilius Paulus says, I will try. But they meet Hannibal. Okay, I got to look up my pages. At a place near a town called Cannae. And it's the worst defeat in Roman history. It's proverbial. All later Romans will talk about this horrible battle. Why? Because Varro said, let's do it. And Aemilius Paulus lost control. It was a slaughter. So let me read what Livy says as the Romans know they're losing. The whole force was now broken and dispersed. Those who could recovered their horses, hoping to escape. Lentulus, the military tribune, as he rode by, saw the consul Paulus sitting on a stone and bleeding profusely. Lucius Aemilius, he said, you only in the sight of heaven are guiltless of this day's disaster. Take my horse while you still have some strength left, and I am here to lift you up and protect you. Do not add to the darkness of your calamity by a consul's death. Without that, we have cause enough for tears. God bless your courage, Paulus answered, but you have little time to escape. Do not waste it in useless pity. Get you gone, and tell the Senate to look to Rome and fortify it with strong defenses before the victorious enemy can come. And take a personal message too. Tell Quintus Fabius that while I lived, I did not forget his counsel, and that I remember it still in the hour of death. As for me, let me die here amongst my dead soldiers. I would not a second time stand trial after my consulship, nor would I accuse my colleague to protect myself by incriminating another. The two men were still speaking when a crowd of fugitives swept by. The Numidians were close on their heels. Paulus fell under a shower of spears, his killers not even knowing whom they killed. In the confusion, Lentulus's horse bolted and carried him off. After that, there was nothing but men flying for their lives. 7,000 got away into the smaller camp, 10,000 into the larger. About 2,000 sought refuge at Cannae, but the village had no sort of defenses, and they were immediately surrounded by Cartholo and his cavalry. This is Hannibal's general. Varro, whether by chance or design, managed to keep clear of the fugitives and reach Venusia with some 70 horsemen. The total number of casualties is said to have been 45,500 infantrymen and 2,700 cavalrymen killed. And then he goes on to list the quaestors, the officials. Though a lot of these were not just foot soldiers. I mean, dead is dead, and that is sad. But in ancient and medieval times, they often marked it by, and how many upper level officers did you lose in addition? That was a harder loss because they're harder to replace. That was the Battle of Cannae. And so, Hannibal had been sending back to Carthage and saying, I've been here a while, won some great victories, but it's not quite going according to plan because, all the towns didn't revolt to me. Can you send me some supplies? Yeah. Oh, no, we'll think about it. You'll think about it? No, I don't know. Well, are you winning? Do you think you'll win? Well, not if we starve to death. Send me some supplies. But when he had this victory, he thought, surely they'll back me up now. And I got to look up another page. There's a famous story that they sent ambassadors to Carthage as evidence of the success of the campaign. He had the captured gold rings poured out in the courtyard of the Senate House. The gold rings that the Romans wore on their fingers, the Roman knights, as a mark of their status, they took them off the dead and collected them. They had baskets full. The rings made such a heap that according to some writers, they were found when measured to amount to 3.5 measures, though it is generally and more credibly held that there were no more than a measure of them. Further to indicate the magnitude of the defeat, Mago went on to explain that gold rings of that sort were worn only by knights, and only by the most distinguished in that order. The chief point of his speech was this, however, that the nearer Hannibal came to his hope of bringing the war to a successful conclusion, the more necessary it was to give him every possible assistance and support. They didn't do it. Now, several thousand guys, got to various camps. Varro made it. Varro survived in great contempt of the people. I can't believe you did that, Varro. Hang on, lost my train of thought. And so at that moment, Hannibal could have chased them down, chased them all the way to Rome, and burst into Rome and sacked it. He could have. But he didn't. He didn't. Well, this was a pretty good day. Why don't we all just have dinner? Just kind of count our spoils, get some rest. Nobody could understand. Hannibal, follow up your victory. One of his generals later, Dorothy Mills quotes this, famously said of him, Hannibal, you know how to win a victory. You just don't know how to use it. When you win like that, go for the gold. Go for Rome. He didn't. And in the meantime, Fabius is right. Hannibal's men are wearing down. He's lost a lot of them to disease. He's had battles with some of the Latin towns that he's tried to get to come over to him. He's had battles where he didn't win as spectacularly, and he's wearing down. So at this point, I need to mention too, they're also fighting in Sicily. They've sent a general, one of the consuls, Marcellus, to Sicily. I need to mention that because my next question was, what famous Greek scientist participated in defending Syracuse from the Romans? Who was in Syracuse fighting against the Romans? I think we talked about him a little bit. No, he's a Roman. This is a guy, this is a scientist he's fighting against the Romans. You know him, I bet you. Archimedes. This is the war with Archimedes. All right. Livy also talks about him. An operation launched with such great strength behind it might well have proved successful had it not been for the presence in Syracuse of one particular individual, Archimedes. Archimedes, unrivaled in his knowledge of astronomy, and he was even more remarkable as the inventor and constructor of types of artillery and military devices of various kinds, by the aid of which he was able by one finger, as it were, to frustrate the most laborious operations of the enemy. So Livy goes on to describe all of the various engines of war that he places on the walls, depending on the wall's height, ones that can fling a rock way out, ones that can fling, smaller rocks, but more rapidly, closer up. But my personal favorite is on the side of the city that faced the sea, and the ships were attacking, he built this. Some of the enemy ships came close inshore, too close for the artillery to touch them. And these he dealt with by using a swing beam and grapnel. The method was this. The swing beam projected over the wall, and an iron grapnel was attached to it with a heavy chain. The grapnel was lowered onto the vessel's bows. The beam was swung up, the other arm being brought to the ground by the shifting of a leaden weight. The result was to stand the ship, so to speak, on her tail, bows in the air. Just pick the ship up. Then the whole contraption was suddenly let go. With the result, and the ships falling smashing, as it were, from the wall into the water, to the great alarm of the crew, was more or less swamped. I guess, is that, I love that. It's in parentheses, to the great alarm of the crew. Was more or less swamped, even if it happened to come down an even keel. He just picks the ships out of the water and he just drops them. Boom. It did what? It worked. It says that even, many of them did not land well, and so broke the ship. But even if they landed well, he says that the swell, the splash, so much water swamped the boat. They lost a lot of boats that way. Leonardo da Vinci also was well known for all sorts of, Archimedes and Leonardo da Vinci would have gotten along famously together if they weren't 1,800 years apart in time. Yes, he had all these rigged on the walls of Syracuse. However, yes.
It would grab the sun's rays, but then it would magnify
and set things on fire. He's awesome. Okay, however, now I have to tell the sad part. The city was turned over to the troops to pillage as they pleased because eventually the Romans conquered Syracuse. After guards had been set at the houses of the exiles who had been in the Roman lines, many brutalities were committed in hot blood and the greed of gain. And it is on record that Archimedes, while intent upon figures which he had traced in the dust, he's working out a geometry problem, with a stick. And regardless of the hideous uproar of an army let loose to ravage and despoil a captured city, was killed by a soldier who did not know who he was. Marcellus was distressed by this. He had him properly buried and his relatives inquired for, to whom the name and memory of Archimedes were an honor and protection. The soldier came in. Archimedes is, like you are, I'm sure, when you're doing geometry or anything related to that. Like, I don't know anything that's happening around me. I'm so engrossed in my problem. And they say that he said to the soldier, back off and don't step on my figures. Which is kind of rude to a soldier with a sword. The soldier thought so and just killed him. And Marcellus found out, and like Libby says, he was distressed. Archimedes would have been an incredible asset for the Roman army if they could have captured him and made use of his talents. And so not only did you brutally kill a brilliant mind, but you just lost us all the help he could have given us. That is the end of Archimedes, one of the great Greek scientists. Remember, Syracuse was Greek. Sicily was Greek. It was those old Greek colonies that we talked about last fall. So he's always listed in those books of great Greek scientists, although he's much later in time than many of them. Yes? I don't think so. I don't think Archimedes had any means to. I don't think so. I think he just. Oh, Marcellus have him killed. Oh, I don't remember, but I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sorry. I thought you meant didn't Archimedes kill the soldier? No, I don't think so. But yes. Okay, so back to the main part of the war. Back in Spain, the two Scipio brothers have been killed in battle. But one of them has a son, the other has a nephew, because they're brothers, same guy, another Scipio. And they call him back to Italy. He runs and he gets elected consul and he says, here's the plan. Hannibal is getting tired and worn out and he does not have enough supplies. But he is holding on way longer than we thought he would. But if somebody attacks his home, he'll go back and defend it. I want to take an army to Africa. And I want to attack Carthage. And they will tell him to come home and help them. Yes, Jesse?
It would be really funny if they just started going back and forth, trying to get away with attacking Carthage, and he was trying to go back and forth all over the edge of like Spain and Gaul. Like that would be hilarious if he just had
that would.
Up and down.
And maybe, but poor Hannibal probably doesn't have that option because he's running low on resources. So Scipio announces this. This is what I think we should do. And they said, are you nuts? Fabius says this. In this case, Fabius's judgment wasn't as good. That's lunatic. You want to take our army to Africa and leave behind Hannibal and his whole army rampaging through Italy. You want to just leave us with no army. Scipio's like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I'm telling you it will work. I am telling you, the moment he knows we're headed there, they will call him back. It worked. Scipio took his army to Africa, and they, surrounded by sea and land. They win a few minor skirmishes, and the Carthaginian Senate is like, come back, Hannibal. Please come back as fast as possible. Yeah. When he, I know, when he asks for something, they don't do it when they ask for something. But it is his home. Although he hasn't been there since he was little, honestly. But it is his home. So he comes back and he loses. Hannibal loses to Scipio. The Battle of Zama in 202. And it was rough on Hannibal. He didn't want to lose. It was rough on Carthage. Here, look at my notes. So one of the things Rome did to Carthage, they took away a lot of their weapons and a lot of their ships. They wanted to cripple them, so they couldn't really be a threat anymore. But they also said, you're not allowed to make any sort of war with anyone without our permission. No fighting without our permission. Okay, and they left it at that. Scipio gets a new nickname. He gets like Mucius Scaevola, the left-handed. He gets to be Publius Scipio Africanus. And all his descendants get to be Africanus because they conquered in Africa. Okay, and everybody thought, all right, it's done. Carthage has been put in her place. All is well. The Scipio family is renowned. Great. Okay, but it's not the end of the story. The Numidians. The Numidians were a group of people that lived just south of Carthage. And the Numidians started harassing Carthaginian villages, started attacking groups of people, poking and prodding at them, stirring up trouble. Yes. No. No, as far as I can tell, there's some sort of native African, this is an aside, this is a digression, but I'm curious about it. I just think, I can't tell which of these groups of people are Middle Eastern and white or African and black. Do you know what I mean? The Egyptians are not black, but the Ethiopians are. But you get the Sahara, so the sub-Saharan Africans, they're not going back and forth but I get the impression from things I read that the Numidians were a black African tribe, as opposed to the white groups that had their source here, and source in the East. But here's the interesting thing: the reason I don't know is because they never talk about race. They just don't care. Like sometime in the Iliad, it says something about Black Memnon and his Ethiopians. Like, great, all right, but they don't. We seem to care a lot more than they cared, and they just don't mention it. They don't mention it. But I think they are a native African group and not a settling group. I don't know that that's the reason they're fighting, though. I think the Numidians just are poking and prodding an animal, to get something started. And there might be border disputes, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's something minor and it escalates. So Carthage fights back. Carthage, you're not allowed to fight anyone without Rome's approval. Remember? Well, it was self-defense. We don't want to hear it. You're not allowed. So the Romans sent a delegation. Did you want to say something earlier? Okay. They did not. They did not. They sent the delegation to see what's going on. And one member of this delegation was a senator named Cato. And Cato, while he was there, he talked to some people, tell me about the Numidians, tell me what's going on. But he did some exploring in Carthage. And what he saw disturbed him. He saw lots of ships, more ships than he thought Carthage really should have. He saw lots of weaponry, a large body of young men able to fight. It seemed to him that Carthage was getting really, really strong after, 30, 40 years down the road after the Second Punic War. And he didn't like it. So they settled the problem with the Numidians, and they went back. But Cato couldn't forget. Carthage is a snake. This is what Cato thinks. Remember Dido. And we will swear hatred between my children and their children forever. Carthage will come back and bite us again if we don't bite her first. And so this is my funniest, this is my favorite. I don't know if I have a favorite. This is in my top 10 anyway of funny ancient world things. Cato made it a policy every time he got up to speak in the Senate. Doesn't matter what he's talking about. Doesn't matter. He always ends his speech by saying, and I am of the opinion that Carthage should be destroyed. Carthago delenda est. In some Latin books, this is a phrase you're supposed to. Carthage should be destroyed. Carthago delenda est. So he's talking about raising taxes for roads. And he talks about the roads and he says, and Carthage should be destroyed. I think it's hilarious. Every time he talks, he always ends with that. And so, sometimes when you hear something over and over again, you start to believe it. If they tell you that Pepsi or 7-Up will make your life great on commercials, they say that to you enough, you start to believe it is true, even though it will not. Sorry. It's still tasty, but it will not make your life happy and wonderful. And eventually you'll have diabetes or something. So people heard this over and over and over every time Cato got up to speak. And might I add, Cato was a great speaker. He's really good at what he did. And they heard this over and over, like, I think Carthage ought to be destroyed. They started to think maybe it should be. And so they sent a member of the Scipio family, no less, an adopted member, but a member nonetheless, Scipio Aemilianus, to go deal with it. And there was a brief siege of Carthage. Well, I say brief. I think it was more than a year. But this is not something that's going to go on for 20 years. Okay. And Carthage surrendered. And Carthage has to give the Romans 300 of their children for hostages from the best families. Surrender all your ships and weapons. And pay money. Pay money into the treasury, the Roman treasury, set amount every year. We're like, but we don't have money. Oh, find it. And they complained, and they were slow to do some of these things, and understandably, all right? It was devastating. So Scipio comes back, and he says, okay, now here's what we're going to do. We are relocating Carthage. We are moving you 10 miles away from the ocean, and we are burning this to the ground. It is gone. Yeah. And so the famous story of Scipio, though, this was brutal. But so they have no port. You see, they have no port. Here's this excerpt is written by Polybius. He's a historian who was there. He was a friend of Scipio Aemilianus. This guy was there. At the sight of the city utterly perishing amid the flames, Scipio, who was watching, burst into tears and stood long reflecting on the inevitable change which awaits cities, nations, and dynasties, one and all, as it does every one of us men. This, he thought, had befallen Ilium, Troy, once a powerful city, and the once mighty empires of the Assyrians, Medes, Persians, and that of Macedonia, lately so splendid. And unintentionally or purposely, he quoted from the Iliad, "The day shall be when holy Troy shall fall, and Priam, lord of spears, and Priam's folk." And then turning round to a friend who stood near him, he grasped his hand and said, "It is a wonderful sight, but I know not how I feel a terror and dread lest someone should one day give the same order about my own native city." Someday this could be Rome. And he orders it done and he cries over it. Because this could be my home someday. And you know what? 600, 550 years later, Rome is going to be sacked. It's not going to be burned to the ground ever, though, as we know, because you can visit. But it's going to become so poor eventually that cattle are going to graze in the forum. In the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, Rome was dirt poor. It was filthy, with animals just roaming through the ancient ruins. But it's not going to be like Carthage. So Carthage existed, it continued to exist, but not the same Carthage. So 600 years later, 550 years later, St. Augustine is going to go to school in Carthage. But not that Carthage, the new Carthage. Those are the Second and Third Punic Wars. And Carthage was no longer a power. And can you see what happens then? It's like dominoes, like pushing the dominoes over. When the soul, when the beating heart of all of these holdings crashes, who do they fall to? Rome. Rome just swoops in and takes everything. In 146 BC, they leveled Carthage. And they took out another city too in 146 BC. This is what you're going to read about next week, but I will tell you. Nice. Corinth in Greece. Same year, the Romans took Greece. Do you see how they were here, and then they took in Sicily, and then they conquered Carthage, and then they got Carthage's stuff, and that same year, they swooped around here, and now Greece is part of the Roman Empire. It's spreading. Corinth, the city to which the letters to the Corinthians, Paul's letters to the Corinthians. Okay, that's what I want you to read about next week. We're going to read chapters 10 and 11. This is the wrong week I'm looking at. Yes, they're short. It's 11 pages total. It's much shorter than what I had you read this week. This was an anomaly because, you read, there's no good place to stop it. And we have to read our poem about Hannibal, although it's really cheesy this time, guys. I'm going to warn you. It's really bad, but Hannibal and his elephants came marching, marching, marching. Hannibal and his elephants came marching over the Alps. They marched to fight the Romans in the streets and in the fields, with spears and clubs and javelins, with arrows, swords, and shields. Hannibal and his elephants came marching, marching, marching. Hannibal and his elephants came marching over the Alps. This general from Carthage, fighting far from home, won battle after battle, but he couldn't conquer Rome. Hannibal and his elephants came marching, marching, marching. Hannibal and his elephants came marching over the Alps. The best thing about traveling with elephants, as opposed to a donkey or skunk, you don't have to buy extra luggage, since elephants come with a trunk. Very bad. Very bad. I told you it was bad. I told you. I warned you. All right. Okay. Let's talk about John and for the temple. And as we do so, we're going to start writing a new paper. We're not writing the paper this week, though. We are just gathering ideas this week. But let's gather some ideas together. So go ahead and open up, get a piece of paper out, either notebook paper, or you can just use the back of your reading questions because it's a blank page for you. And here, let me get my stuff in order. Here, let's get rid of this too. I actually think I just moved this so I can have lots of room to write. So we are going to ask a new question to write a paper on. And here's what I'd like you to write down. This is our question. Should John, our main character, John, by the way, one of my students yesterday said they were having just a heck of a time remembering the difference between John of Giscala and John of Gamala. Did anybody have trouble whenever they mentioned Giscala versus Gamala? Or are we good? Do we know which is which? John of Giscala is one of the nasty robber band guys, one of the factions. And he's a historical person. He's real. John of Gamala is our John, our hero, the main character of the book, who was, as you read, harassing the Roman troops who were besieging Gamala. And they snuck in that night and burnt their tents and cut the tent ropes so the tents would fall down on the guys and set fire to everything and barely got away. So Gamala, that's our John. But usually if you keep reading, if you're not sure who they're talking about, if he's mean and nasty, it's John of Giscala. If he's nice, it's our John. Okay. Should John have formed his own band? Not a rock band. His own band of freedom fighters to harass the Romans. And I would like to talk about this. We're going to have a yes column and a no column. Because, John's attitude in this book is that Josephus was all wrong. Josephus wanted to hole up in cities, right? Fortified cities with strong walls and say, well, we'll just wait them out. The only problem is the Romans are really, really good at knocking down cities from the outside. They're good at knocking down cities, and then the people inside the city start running out of things. You start running out of food. If you don't have a water source inside the walls, you start running out of water, and that's worse. I mean, that'll kill you faster than the running out of food. John said, what we really need to do is we just need to have people just going to the mountains and staying in the hills and the forests and coming out and attacking them, sort of guerrilla warfare style, instead of marching out to meet them, which we will lose, or holding up in cities, which we will all die in the city. He knows this because he almost died in a city. So I have some questions that we're going to ask ourselves to get information. But before I do that, I just want to open it up to any observations you have one way or the other. What do you think, Jesse? Yes, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Oh, you hate it? Okay, I have to know what you have against it. You said it was boring? The Bronze Bow. It was a young man that, oh, it's been some years now, but this one stuck with me. A young man who wanted to, he hated the Romans. They hated the Romans, and he wanted to join a band. You know, I'm pretty sure all students have. My son's was a Civil War book called Shades of Gray. He hated it. He just hated it. He said it was the worst. It's so boring. And he turned 30 this last weekend, but he still compares every book. Like, well, it was better than Shades of Gray. I'm ashamed to say that it was one of the ones that he was old enough. I gave it him to read because it was on good, list that it's okay. But John of Gamala, our hero, the fiance of Mary, young, strong, and gallant. Okay, as all G.A. Henty heroes are. Okay, she is. They are related, but they are far enough related that it doesn't matter in this case. Once upon a time, depending on where you are, cousin marriage was okay. I know, don't think too hard about it. You're all thinking of your own cousins now and going, ew. I am a little bit too. Okay, so I have cousins who's like, no, I don't think so. Does anybody have a response to this question before I start asking you questions to guide you through? But it's fine if you don't, because I have lots of questions. Mm-hmm.
Or just in a statement, like when you think about that, like if you just think about that question, like out of context, like say like what I'm saying is like you form your own band, like you can get people to like you and what you're doing, but you're also not like making road to a large army, but it's also not like as powerful as an entire.
So I'm going to say something back to you, and you tell me if I'm understanding. Are you insinuating then that it's not a very important question because what he's doing isn't very important or helpful? He's not going to have much impact?
Well, it kind of like it can because like that's what books are about. They're doing heroics.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just
Is John doing this? Let's start with this. Is John doing this because he thinks he will be able to conquer the Romans and drive them out? Does he think that is going to happen? No, he does not think his little band is going to single-handedly turn the tide of the war. This isn't even his goal. What is his goal? Maybe we can't answer, should he do it if we don't know what his goal is. Okay, so, okay, yes, he should, because it will help him survive. Let's just It's always good when we do this to jot down everything that occurs to us. It may not be helpful later, but if we don't jot it down, we will forget it. What else? What else might it do? What else does he think that it will do or could do? What did he do at Gamala? Did he stop Gamala from being taken? Did you get that far in the book? Shoot.
Well, he did.
Oh, okay.
Just trying to think.
Oh, yes, he did. So Gamala still fell to the Romans. But what did John accomplish? What did his little band accomplish? Do you remember? They snuck in. So I mentioned this just a minute ago. They snuck in at night. They did. They trashed the camp. They burnt things. They killed some of the soldiers. They sliced the tent ropes so the tents would collapse on the other soldiers and they'd be so confused they don't know who's attacking them. And so they killed a few. They only lost one guy of John's band that night. But the Romans still took Gamala. So what did that accomplish? That night, when they did that, what did they accomplish? It's okay if you say nothing. Okay. They intimidate the Romans.
And not necessarily like their band intimidates them. The Romans are just intimidated in general. Because, like, they know about John.
They know there are bands forming.
And so, like, they're not necessarily scared of bands because they can't do any lasting or major harm to their army. But it's just frustrating. Like, because when they went in and attacked the camp, they probably
Romans
burned some food or
are
burned some cars.
frustrated
It's just annoying that why is this doing like
and
it's not gonna
annoyed.
take out our whole army or anything. It's just that it's always gonna heads back up. It's just-
Red just said something. The Romans are annoyed. What might the Romans do because they're annoyed? Yeah. Yes. It could push the Romans to bring more troops, to retaliate, to punish them. It could have that effect. But you also, just don't forget it. You also said that the Romans are frustrated and intimidated. So, a Roman army isn't going to fall to John's band. But remember, the Roman army is made up of individual Roman guys. And if I'm the particular Roman guy who happens to be on night watch duty, and I know guys are creeping out of the woods at night and killing the guards, this is going to make me tense, right? And when we are tense, do we do our job as well? When we're tense and afraid? No, we don't. When you've got your heart beating a little bit. I mean, he's a Roman soldier, got it. He's brave, he's great, he's a guy. And when you know you're there and you just won't even see it coming when they get you, this has got to be nerve-wracking. And for them to plant the seed in these Roman camps, you will never see us coming and you don't know when we're coming. It could be tonight, it could be next week. You will not know. That could be disturbing. What were you going to say, Matthew? Okay, I like that. Adds to problem of roaming, feuding bands. Do you know what I mean by that? Okay. If I ever write something or I have you jot something down and you don't think you'll understand what it means later, please ask me to rephrase it. Well, let's ask ourselves, you guys are doing great already. Do you remember that we talked about the idea of common topics? Common topics are a rhetorical tool basically to search our minds for information. That's all they are. Topos means a place. And so these are places for our brains to go. So we're putting stuff on the board, and then suddenly we get to the place where I don't know. I have no more ideas. Then we ask ourselves questions. And I just picked out a couple that I thought were more helpful. They're not all helpful all the time. Like one of them we did last time was definition. Is Aeneas a good leader? And we defined what's a good leader. I don't think we need to define rebel band. I mean, I feel like we know what that means. I don't feel like definition is so helpful. But one I thought was helpful is the common topic of relationship. All right. So how are things related to each other? One of the questions that we ask in that is, what causes it? How is it related to things outside? So let's ask us, and this takes us back to this answer. What else besides it will help him survive? What's causing John to form this band? There's lots of answers to this on different levels. Yeah, but I think Red's talking more about like Josephus's choices. But these are both true.
From past experience and reading and learning, he knew that, I mean, we've seen this, what was that? The Romans do that somewhere, where they just sat inside the walls and died. Somebody did that, where they just sat inside the walls. It plagued up, they got plague.
Yeah, Athens.
Yes.
You're thinking of Athens during the Peloponnesian War.
Like, they've seen these things, sort of things happen, like, not necessarily just that, but other places too. And so, he didn't want to just sit there and die, and he kind of wanted to kind of make a mark for himself.
Okay,
Not
so
necessarily only for pride, but probably he didn't want to just sit around and he wanted to contribute.
okay, so it's a protest against the policy of holding up in the cities. But we're going to go to Matthias's in a minute. Of holding up in cities to be besieged. That was, I'm sure I could have phrased that much better. So that's one motive. That's very good. One motive. Okay, Matthias has another motive. That he hates okay, he doesn't hate the Romans like the boy in the bronze bow, but he certainly doesn't. Who wants an enemy rampaging your town? The Romans at this point have done some pretty bad things. And okay, that's the deal breaker for you. That's the deal breaker. Beheading, it's all good. Okay, so yes, he should, because what? Okay, so there's safety, although his numbers aren't big, but he's safer than him being alone. Safety in numbers, I like that. And he is okay, I'm going to put hates because I don't know what else to say. He hates the Roman occupation. He doesn't hate it like the zealots, of Judea.
I don't know about in numbers. Like, yeah, he has a few people.
Well, I think as opposed to working alone. Is that what you mean? Okay. I mean, he could try to do something alone, but it's much better if he has 20 or 30 guys with him so they can work in concert and they can get more done.
So there was other people.
Yes. Yes. But you know what? So now when we answer this question, why is he doing it? He hates the Roman occupation of Judea. It also makes me come over here. The Romans are the lawful rulers of his country. We can argue that. The Romans are the legitimate rulers. Now, I'm going to put legitimate in quotes because you can argue about that. The Romans are the rulers because they took over. Maybe you don't find that legitimate, but that happened over like almost 100 years before John. John's whole life and his parents' lives and his grandparents' lives, the Romans have been in charge. This is a long-standing thing. So you may say, well, he hates the Roman occupation, but hello, rebellion is wrong. Maybe you don't believe rebellion is wrong. We can argue that on both sides. But if that's the reason why he's doing it, you can argue both sides. Now, here's something else. Well, let me ask you before I tell you. Can you think of another reason why he may be doing it? To survive, for his own protection, to fight the Romans, to prove himself. You know what? And I feel like that could swing either way. Yes, you know what? I'm putting this in the middle. John proves his bravery. Now, if you think that's a good thing, and that's a motive for him, then it's a yes. But if you think that's a poor self-aggrandizement, do you know what I mean? Look at me, I'm the leader of a band, I'm awesome. Now, we know that doesn't seem to be John's attitude, right? He doesn't even want to be outed as John of Gamala. He doesn't want to be known. But if that's a motivation, I think we could swing that both ways. The young man wants to prove his mettle, good for you. Or the young man just wants to be a bigwig, not so good for you. Yes. No, although it sounds like his dad was well respected there around the lake. Do you know what I mean? Locally, not status, but respect, we'll say. But this is true. Yeah. He hadn't really had any opportunity, had he? He's okay. I think that's a legitimate possible reason. Did one of you have your hand up? Were you going to say something? Okay. How about, I'm going to throw out a couple of mine just for time constraints. I put desperation. He feels like he has to do something to help. I mean, would you agree? I mean, you can disagree with me. I feel like he just feels like sitting and picking the grapes and the olives and just waiting for something bad to happen. He feels like this is my country and I ought to pitch in and I don't know what else to do. So I'm going to do this. So we might say it's better than doing nothing. And by that I mean doing nothing against the Romans. But you know what? I could also see it the other way. Whenever we act just out of desperation or emotion, we make mistakes, right? So depending on your look at it, we could say he's acting on impulse and emotion. I'm going to put a little question mark next to that for me, because I'm not sure that the character I read in this book seems to be like he's acting from impulse and emotion. He seems pretty like he thinks things out, and he's a good planner. And it doesn't seem to me like he's just, I'm going to go stir crazy if I don't do something to help. But yet he's young, and this could be a factor, maybe. My last, and it's not my last, what causes it? Desire for freedom. If they could somehow beat the Romans back, now I'm going to qualify the freedom. Qualify that means I'm going to put limits on it. They might still be under Roman rule, but the Roman army wouldn't be rampaging through Judea anymore. Yeah, but you don't like that. I can see. Go ahead. So it's not really freedom?
Yeah, well, freedom already happened because he's.
So he's personally free? You mean like he's got as much freedom as he's ever going to get?
Yeah, he'll be ruled by Rome. Nobody can really do anything seems also limited by its own government and their rules, and it's not personally free. I think that's the most.
Well, but could that still be desire for freedom, though? Could he be going, and maybe it's not freedom from Rome, but it's personal freedom, not under the watchful eye of the local Roman commander?
Should be a yes, because when you look at the question, should John have food in his own vein, then you say yes because he wanted a personal freedom.
Okay, I'm going to put desire for freedom, and you guys can interpret that however you want. Go ahead.
So it's the Roman army, so they're probably not going to win. So I feel like the Romans will be more benevolent towards you and give you more like freedom within the country if you just I don't mean like surrender, but like don't put up that big of a fight.
They're never going to win. He hopes that they will save the temple. Remember the name of the book, For the Temple. All right, he doesn't ever think that he's going to completely end Roman rule in Judea, but they're never going to win. And what was the second thing you said, Matthew? He might stir up. Oh yeah, okay. The Romans, yes, the Romans kinder to those who submit. Those who willingly submit. That's good. The last one I wrote down under what causes it is an area we haven't explored yet. Worry about his family. If he can draw the attention of the Roman troops, now he attacks these camps, and he draws their attention away, maybe they won't be messing with his parents' farm. I thought maybe that, but I can see a flip side to this. See, that's the problem. So I'm going to put wants to protect his family, but I'm also going to say if they find out who he is, the Romans will attack his family. You know they will. This also could be a bigger one too. If they find out who he is, they may attack all the people in that region. They may, I'll just go up here. They may attack family, which is basically written down, friends, property. All those people living at that end of the lake are at risk if he's discovered.
You mean like find out who he is, like find out that he's attacking him, right?
Yeah, because they know John of Gamala, and you might say, well, they know who he is. They don't know who he is. Even his own family doesn't know who he is. He's just John of Gamala. No, he's that kid who lives in this house, and Mary is his cousin, and these people are his parents. Do you see what I mean? If they discover his actual identity, they may come down on all the people, because what will the assumption be? You helped him. You knew and you helped him. Or just to be mean to him.
And that, like, if they find out that he's part of the band that he's attacking, because
Yes. Where we put that? I know I harass them. Another relationship question we could ask is, what might it lead to? How is it related to the future? We already did some of this. It might lead to freedom. It might lead to the destruction of others. Who else might it destroy? Who else might get hurt? His family, himself, and his band. They may lose their lives. They may die. And if they do, who will care for his family, for his parents and Mary. Um, uh, you know, we have all sorts of things nowadays to take care of people when they're old. You know, people have Social Security and they have 401ks and all this, but this is very new. All through the rest of history, it was your children. My children will care for me. This is why the book of Ruth is so very sad. You know, Ruth and Boaz go to Moab because of the famine, and they have two sons, and their sons marry. You guys know the story. And both their sons die. And they're left with two daughters-in-law, one of whom goes back to her own family, and only Ruth stays with Naomi. This woman has no 401k. She has no stocks. She has no Social Security benefits coming in. Those sons were her Social Security. And so, you know, back then, your children were your protection in old age. We presume your children will not let you starve to death. They will take you in and they will take care of you when you were too old to work and do anything. And he's their only son. He's their only son. And yeah, Mary could marry someone else and he could be like a son to them and take care of them, but we don't know that will happen. So they're relying much responsibility rests on John in his life, and he may lose it. All right, I'm going to move on to the other the common topic because they're very much related. And it made me, as I was writing down, I thought of something else to say. Comparison. To what is it better or worse, more or less desirable or important? We already said this once. I would rather fight than do nothing. That's a comparison, really, better or worse. So we just said that he may die. Is there a better or worse, lesser or greater that goes along with that? Can you think? Better to die fighting I don't need to do than, you know what I mean. Yeah, I'd rather go down fighting than just do nothing. Yes, Rhett.
This goes along with like the honor part, but like it kind of like actually the better to fight like honor, but like you wouldn't even notice the guy who started death or the guy was fighting, trying even one year for the guys fighting several tens of thousands of several thousand people in this army just trying to do whatever you can, and you went out and you fought and annoyed them and just messed with them and did as much as you can, and you got them.
Yeah.
They finally took you out. And you rather be those the guy below you got they started.
Yeah, they just gave up. They didn't even try. They just gave up. Absolutely. So it's better to die fighting. Better. How can we put what Rhett just said? Better to try than to give up. What were you going to say, Jesse? Better to die what? But yes, better to try than to give up. Better to die a hero. All of these things are related. I'm sorry. I'm going to make a little. Another comparison question. I'm going to just move on because we only have about 5 minutes left. To what is it similar? And here's what I'm thinking. Think of other rebellions. Does rebellion always go well? So sometimes it works. So rebellion, sometimes successful, sometimes against a much stronger foe, right? And we can use as proof of that I'm just going to call it Rev War. Can I call it AM Rev War, American Revolutionary War? But Sometimes rebellions don't work. Can you think of an American rebellion that didn't work? Civil War. Sometimes.
That wouldn't have worked either way. You know?
Well, I don't know. They could have. There could be like two countries now fail. South.
It kind of,
Yes.
Well, yes, and that's unfortunately a conversation we have time to have. That's assuming that the Civil War was all about slavery, and I personally don't think it was. I think it was about states' rights, the right of states to pass your own laws. Many Southerners did not even approve of slavery. Many Northerners did. So it's complicated, but nevertheless, it failed. Right? So rebellion sometimes succeeds, sometimes fails. If we compare it to rebellion, here's a question. Can't really prove this question. This is more of an imagination question. How often do you think people rebel against Rome and get away with it? Yeah, as far as I know, never. People, oh, my map is gone. Over in the east, there were these people, the Parthians, and the Romans could never stamp them out. They never really were controlled by Rome, though. It wasn't a rebellion. They were just always fighting because they didn't want Rome to take over. So I would say rebellion, this is a no. Rebellion against Rome is hopeless. It's not going to happen. Hopeless isn't what I would say. There's no precedent for it. Did. This is true from inside. Okay, last thing I'll bring up. John's isn't the only band that's roaming around doing stuff, right? What are the other ones like?
And it's kind of like a game, essentially.
They're like a gang and they're robbers. So, you guys are now John's band, all right? Congratulations. And you've been out there a long time. You started out with really good intentions, had a bag full of money. We're going to pay for all the food we need. But you ran short on money. Some of you got hurt, had to buy some medicines and pay for a doctor. You don't have the money anymore. And you are working really hard to protect all these farmers. I say we just go take a few of their goats. They owe us. Don't they owe us? I think they owe us. We'll just grab a few pies off the windowsill, dig some stuff out of their garden, and if we find some money laying around there, they should pay us, for protecting them. Do you see? John could become like the robber bands. Can you see how it could happen? How you could maybe start out with really good intentions, but circumstances caused you to do some things that are morally questionable. And after you do a few of those, it gets easier and easier and easier. I don't think John of Giscala woke up. Was he mean as a toddler? I don't know what made him that way. I'm not going to speculate, yes. He isn't, but are they always? Do you see what I mean? Does every bad guy start out as a bad guy? I know. And Rhett, it is a stretch. It is a stretch. I agree with Rhett, frankly. I don't think he seems like that sort. And as a matter of fact, as you read the book, you will find he's not that sort. But this exercise is pouring out ideas. Do you see what we're doing? We're just pouring out ideas. They may be questionable, they may be marginal, but we're pouring them out. Here's what I want you to do this week. I want you to read the next 5 chapters of For the Temple, 11 through 15. And I want you to keep adding to this chart. As you read, if you notice something and it sparks an idea, add it. All right? And remember that often when you have an idea, it may have a flip side. It may produce a mirror image idea that can go on the other side. And I would like you to continue to add to this list. It's already a formidable list. We could probably just write our paper from this. But you're not done with the book yet. So I want you to see as things unfold and ask yourself, what is this leading to? What might happen? What might happen if he makes the other choice? at this moment? Is this like any other story? Is this like any other circumstance? And compare them. And this will help you to generate ideas. Does that make sense? So no paper. The only writing you're going to do for me is adding to this list. So just when it's time for you to sit down with your book, just open up this sheet and grab a pen and just have it sitting next to you as you read and jot down whatever you notice. And then we can share those with each other next week, okay? All right, the high schoolers are breathing down our necks. We have to go. No, we're gonna outline and maybe read next week, or right.